Welcome to the podcast, Rob Hunt, president of Peeple Inc. in Vancouver, BC. Thanks for joining me today. Look forward to having a conversation with you.
Hey, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, it's great. I reached out, a bit of a cold outreach, a friend of mutual acquaintance. I've mentioned your name several times over the years. I thought, oh, Rob, maybe this is a good opportunity to meet Rob. And we had a little bit of a chat before Christmas, but here we are recording a podcast together. So
Yeah, first time. Good.
yeah, so it's great. It's back into the podcasting thing for me. But yeah, Rob, I'm curious. I'd love to just learn a little bit more about you. And I think always the best place to start off with that is just what's the story of Rob Hunt? How did you come to be the president of People Inc? What do you guys do? But then the story is always the part that interests me. So I'd love to hear your version.
Okay. There's a couple different versions of the story, but the best one is with $200 and a good lawyer, you can incorporate and you can become the president of anything you want. So there's a quick version of the story.
Amen.
But no, the story of People Inc. was about 14 years ago now. And after I had left a long career with the Jim Pattison Group out of Vancouver, which is where I live, I decided I wanted to create my own enterprise. And I knew that I wanted to work with people and trying to further people. And it's one of my own personal mottos was trying to help people reach beyond their grasp. I knew it was going to be all about developing people. And so obviously the name, I didn't spend that much time thinking about something that would relate to people too much other than misspelling it on purpose. I figured out in the early days that misspelling it would be the way that I could protect the name. People Inc. was born, but actually it's People Development Inc. is the official name and doing business as People Inc. today. In the early days, I knew that with that motto of helping people reach beyond their grasp, what was important to me to work with business people, founders, owners, leaders, and senior leadership teams, and providing a basket of services, if you will, to help them build better teams, attract better people, train those people on better business systems to try and scale their enterprises, and basically provide some executive level coaching and support. And I called it at the time, I was in the back of my mind because I also toyed with this name, but I was seeing as being a little bit of a bit of a business Sherpa, if you will, right? Someone to help carry the gear a little of the ways and set up base camp and help you get to the summit. But you had to be involved with the journey. And so it was all about the whole adage of walking beside business leaders and trying to help them as they go about learning and learning to do business, as they say. And so that was 14 years ago, and we're still doing a lot of those same things today.
Interesting. So getting people to reach beyond their grasp, that doesn't just come out of thin air. I'm curious what led to that. It is the precursor to that kind of inspiration.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have heard various, maybe there's some of them are cliches, maybe they're lines, but have come to know that doing the hard work and really leaning in, sometimes with a lot of fear and trepidation in the early days, is where the real learning takes place. It's the hard stuff. I've done speaking engagements with people, and I always talk about some of the things I really screwed up badly, but yet they were the best left. And I think that helping people reach beyond that grasp is to try and give people bit of a safety net and give them the courage to try and push forward and do something that doesn't feel real good. In other words, being comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Right.
And I think a lot of humans, we all struggle authentically with that place. We've all been in that place in our lives where that happens. So that's always been a motivator for me because, we've all done things that we didn't know a thing about and leaned in and we were scared. I'll say scared blankless to do, but yet when we came out of it, the end of it, we found it was some of the greatest learning and the greatest encouragement for future growth.
Yeah. And you can swear on this podcast, by the way, just so you
Hey, 18 podcasts, I love it.
yeah, it's just not all ages.
There you go.
Or it's interesting because you talk about failures and mistakes and those kinds of things and reaching beyond your grasp. I think there's this fantasy around failure that there's sort of two versions. There's the version that is avoidance of failure. And then there's like the Silicon Valley, the Mexico City version of failure, which is celebrated and stuff like that. But I get the sense that it's somewhere in the middle for you where I'm not going to avoid failure, but it's a learning opportunity to not necessarily compass.
Yeah, I think it's the acknowledgement. I think it's the acknowledgement that we're all gonna fail and it's okay. We're not going to the electric chair, hopefully, for any of our failures, but
Right.
that we have to accept failure as part of the journey. And if you're not, I don't think you're trying hard enough. If you're not failing, you're not stepping out beyond that place where maybe you shouldn't have to test the waters. And so I think it's trying to push the acceptance that failure is not an aim, but failure is a kind of mogul that we have to navigate around. And at the end of navigation, we're gonna get some great lessons out of it. We're gonna go, "Oh, shit, that I'm not gonna do that again." But at the same point, we go, "Hey, I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't done that." And it's true what a lot of people say. Some of the best things they've learned is through failures. There's no question about it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think one of the things, uh, one place we learn from failure is our own, but we learn really well from the failure of the stories of failure of other people too.
100%.
I think that's where it's such a good thing for leaders to share those stories of failure because not only does it humanize leaders, but it's also like this reality check and this great well of potential learning for
Yeah.
people that are working.
We run leadership forums as part of our business. We run 2 leadership forums, and one of them has a dozen CEOs, and we've
Right.
actually got an exercise called the Church of Fail. The exercise is really about, "Hey, tell us about your biggest fail. What led to it? What was your experience? And
Yeah.
what came out of it?" And amongst all the sessions that we've done with people over the years, that was one of the favorite sessions that, the attendees loved being involved with and hearing because it was a ton of vulnerability, but it was a ton of learning for everybody to say, "Wow." And it's also acknowledging that we're all similar. We're all failing. It's not, "Oh, only these 3 guys failed, but these 10 didn't." Everyone was required to say, "Hey, what was your biggest screw up?"
Yeah. Yeah. No, nobody gets on alive kind of thing.
No one.
So what's yours?
What's my biggest? I don't know if I've had it yet. We know do we
That's
know if we
totally
do
different.
we know if we've had it yet? Oh, I've definitely had a few. And if you go to the basics, there's people that I've hired funny being in the people business, right? But there's people I've
Sure.
hired years ago, and I thought, "This guy is tragic. He's never gonna amount to anything," and had some major misses and then went on to see him do some great things and go, "How did I miss that?" There's those simple things. I think we've all made the big people mistakes, both not hiring somebody that we should have or hiring and giving huge projects to people that we shouldn't have. So there's stuff like that. I remember another one preparing for a major conference, an annual conference, and I was one of many duties. I was responsible for delivering the annual awards, certificates, magazines, and everything else that went over it that basically announced all the winners for all the companies over the year. And this is a big deal. This is our annual conference. And I had dropped the ball on making sure that the dates of the deliverables to all the companies that would know who the winners were after the conference. And I remember somebody from the company calling me. I was in Palm Springs, California, where the conference was, and letting me know and go, "I don't know, we just received 25 copies of this magazine, and I think we were meant to receive 50." I said, "Okay, that's interesting. What magazine are you referring to?" "Oh, this is the annual awards, thing saying who won the President's Award and who won the other." The problem with that being it was 3 days before the awards ceremony. So you could imagine, I think it was like sheer I didn't know if I was gonna have a heart attack or just be back on a plane to Vancouver, but my boss was gracious enough and just said, "Hey, what are you gonna do about it?" I said, "We're gonna incur a significant shipping bill." He says, "Don't get caught up in the details. I just wanna make sure that every single magazine is back in the hands of who it should have been in
Right.
3 days ago
Right.
and stays there until the time." So, there's things like that. At the end of the day, I always say, "Did anybody die of this? No." Was
Right.
it a major screw up on something that could have been nasty? Sure. But there's all kinds of things like that. So obviously, I think maybe out of that, I became more anal on the details in terms of what got delivered and when. So anyway,
Right, right.
a funny story on a screw up.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the most interesting stories that I heard from a colleague of ours was actually about a gentleman he became famous for being a micromanager, but he was really well known. This was in Eastern Canada. He's really well known, and basically what people did was said, "Okay, what we're going to do, what I'll do as an individual, I know this guy has a good reputation. I'm just going to eat it for a couple of years and take this sort of leader on as this micromanaging overlord, and just, but I know it's going to be good for my reputation. Like, get through this." And that's how people had started to see taking a job with this guy, but he had
Yep.
a good reputation as this micromanager. And a colleague of ours worked with him and his team. And what ended up coming out in that process was that as a young executive, he effectively handed off work to one of his team and they fumbled it. And he took that on to see, if I don't micromanage people, it cost my reputation because he got fired and it cost his reputation. His whole team got fired. Like, it ended up snowballing into this really big thing. And the response was to micromanage and be obsessed with the details for years,
Yeah.
detriment of his people. But it actually came out of an act of care from him because he didn't want anybody to have to go through that ever again.
So you went the opposite way. And yeah, and I think it's a natural reaction. You die 1,000 deaths at the time and you go, oh my gosh, I cannot friggin' think about doing that again. I got to make sure that never happens again.
Yeah.
And then you go the opposite way. But I think that's a natural human reaction to do that. And again, I still hear all the time because I'm blessed with the opportunity to work with so many leaders.
Sure.
And during the executive coaching sessions or things, I hear all kinds of different missteps and whatnot. And I think they're often now they're shocked, some of them, when I just go, "Hey, did anyone die?" And they go, "No, but this is a serious thing." And I go, "Yeah, no one died. Get on with it. Fix
Yeah.
it. Get out with it. It's not the worst thing that can happen." But of course, at the time for everybody, it's easy to say that. But when you're in the middle of it, it very much feels like the biggest thing to consume you that day, week, or month.
Yeah, I think that's something that you do get as a coach, particularly of high level leaders, is you see how much they suffer with that other people assume that they don't care about them.
Exactly. Exactly. It's very lonely at the top, right, for leadership. I think that a lot of it, again, going back to I was saying to you about the forums that I have, that I operate two different leadership forums. One of the main reasons for people being there is to share experiences, to learn, and to see that they're not alone, both in some of the
Right.
mistakes and the triumphs that they're doing, but also they're not alone at the top because it's sometimes very difficult when you're leading a company to share a lot of things with your employees because it's either seen as a weakness, which again, I don't think it's always that, but
Yeah.
people often view it as, oh my gosh, that's a weakness. But they also just they don't feel comfortable doing it. They're leading the team. They're not meant to be bleeding to the team. It's that headset.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think we're both from British Columbia, Canada, Western Canada. And I've often referred to it as like the last frontier of entrepreneurial. My great grandfather started a logging business, converted the BC logging industry from steam to diesel, for example. That's how new British Columbia is. So I feel like you go to Vancouver and then you fly to Toronto and it's a very different energy. You fly to New York or LA or any of the other big centers in North America. It's a really different energy than Vancouver. And in a way, it still feels like this small entrepreneurial
Yeah.
town.
Yeah.
And I'm curious because you worked for the Jim Pattison Corporation, which definitely falls into that category. My tie back to this is, you lead people, you don't lead in front of people. I don't know. I think I
Right.
might have been not said that
Right.
exactly the way you did,
Right.
but I think that's that entrepreneurial sort of fervor tends to
Absolutely.
feed that. And I'm curious about your time at Pattison and what that was like, and just generally like being an entrepreneur in BC, where that's pretty normal.
Yeah. Well, to start off, interesting enough, I started off with Pattison back in Eastern Ontario is where I first started working for them. I had a 29-year career with Pattison Group, and I could say it was a highlight, one of my highlights of my working life and my life in many respects. And I've never stopped being grateful for having had that opportunity to be there, learn there, fail fast there sometimes, and do all the variety of things that one could do. So that was like a working MBA for 29 years. So that was a great experience. And for me, I had the blessing of being both in operations as well as working at the corporate side. So I ran 5 different companies over the time and in various different businesses in the trading business, multimedia industry. I was in the media business a couple of times, in fact. And so I did a number of different things and also worked on some different startups and I think that was a very unique experience and something again that I believe in fate. I don't know how it all works, but I do believe in fate. And my opportunity to go there was again major highlight for all the things that I got to do. But Jimmy being the consummate entrepreneur, it is the classic story of rags to riches and his story is actually a beautiful one just from growing up in loose land and living in a house that was surrounded by a moat that they built out because the roof was a thatched one and if it caught fire, the whole thing would burn down and him selling seeds at 7 years old. It's a classic story and really a great one for Canadians because there's not thousands and thousands of those stories in Canada of entrepreneurs. And especially if someone that built a business that was a conglomerate but I think one of the most unique conglomerates I've ever read about in terms of the variety of assets that we own. I think most people, obviously, this will be seen by people, I'm sure, across the country into the US, but in our province, it's the major food retailer or it's the major automotive dealership group. But Pattison Group is into coal shipping and they still own Ripley's Believe It or Not museums worldwide and Guinness World Attractions and packaging companies and fishing companies. And I think that's one of the beautiful things of the Pattison Group is just trying to understand how that all got stitched together over the years to become what it did, which has been a major iconic business in the country.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's making me think about drive around Prince Edward Island when you drive around the north side of PEI. You're driving along the farm country, and then there's a Ripley's, believe it or not, and then Anna Green Gables land, which the first shock is how big the parking lot is.
Exactly. Especially in
Um,
especially in PEI.
yeah,
But Pattison were great years. So, I traveled all around the world. Again, as I said, I ran 5 different operations at the time. I worked at corporate office for 7 years with Jimmy, traveling with him and the group, and probably went to, I don't know, 5 or 6,000 divisional business meetings, which was a quarterly meeting regimen that we had with all the companies. I learned a tremendous amount about not only business, but just all the possibilities and what people could really accomplish if they set their mind with it and had a dedication to doing the right thing and having a process and having a plan.
yeah, I guess that's what I'm curious about as well. Is obviously there's the Jim Pattison story, and then you say this conglomerate is much more complex than most people would initially know. And like you say in BC, what most people are going to know is Jim Pattison took a bunch of billboards going down the highway, and that's a drop in the bucket. I think it's the entrepreneurial spirit. I'm curious how that sort of informed you as a leader and as a human. What did that mean for you? And especially coming from out east to west,
Right.
curious how that entrepreneurial spirit sort of weaved its way into your own story.
Yeah, and it really did. I mean, I was always had entrepreneurial tendencies, and I don't think I would call myself I was a dyed-in-the-wool entrepreneur from a young age. But I had a bunch of different little businesses, along the way, so I was dabbling along the way. I was telling a story the other day about at one point, I had 2 or 3 of the major shopping malls in Toronto locked up, and I supplied all the lockers for people that wanted their winter coats off.
Right.
And, like, now until I discovered running the business, the problems involved with trying to process 20,000 quarters every weekend, the means. And
Just call the mafia and launder it, right?
So I dabbled in a lot of those things. So I dabbled in that. I had a real estate advertising newspaper in Toronto at one point,
Yeah.
and then I was part of a fledgling teenage selling rock T-shirts at the C&E, which is the P&E equivalent.
Right.
For these weren't big enterprise. They're all what you learn later on when you reflect back. You're all trying to solve a pain point for people
Yeah.
or to deliver a service or to deliver a product. But I think what was exciting for me coming to Pattison was learning just how possible entrepreneurship was for everybody. And I learned a tremendous amount about how we did not have to be such a corporate heavy structural business for it to be successful. And one of the stories I still tell today, well, an interesting thing for me is that when I was working at corporate office, when we were at 5 billion in top line revenue, we had 8 executives running the business. I was one of those 8 executives, and we probably had about, I'm gonna say 25 support staff, counting staff that are assisting with everything from the yacht or for corporate services. We had a compound in Palm Springs that we used for business meetings and conferences. And that was at 5 billion. Now, them being well over 16 billion, now I'm losing track because they're still buying businesses even today.
Sure. Yeah.
I did think they just made the largest acquisition last month of a huge supermarket chain in California. But even at that bigger number now, there's still 8 executives
Yeah.
running the business and maybe 45 support staff
Right.
is the only difference. And when I point that out to people, they go, "Well, I'm confused about how that can happen. How do they manage to do that?" And that was one of the biggest things that I learned was through really focusing on making people the most important asset,
Yeah.
ensuring are absolutely crackerjack determined to get the best people for the business, give them support, and ensure that they have proper process and check-ins. You don't need to have hundreds and hundreds of people sitting on top of businesses to help them run. People want to know that they've got a decision-making power to run business and
Right.
that they are free to make their own decisions. And when they do, you're better off, even if they are making mistakes, than having them do a paint by numbers way of running a business. It doesn't work. And so I learned that despite how big the business was continuing to come, we didn't add executives because we didn't need to. And that was a major light bulb moment for me of going on and going, wow, like all things are possible. Get great people, give them a bit of a structure to work within. And that's how we operated. And the other part of that, lesson two of that was that we didn't act like a know-it-all consulting group to tell them what to do. We
Right.
acted like a service center. Jimmy's rules for us were don't give your opinion, ask questions, understand, determine whether we can serve.
Yeah. You said something really interesting there a second ago, which was get the right people for the business. And I was wondering, can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because people have so many different opinions on what top talent means. The research around it's really interesting. I have my father-in-law, for example, is a retired CFO that worked at a very high level in North America. And his opinion is on it that I've found really interesting and different things out there and different practices. But I'm curious what yours is. What does that mean to you?
Right fit, again, right fit is something that you have to determine in the business. I think, first of all, I highly recommend to anyone today that is building senior management teams to really start with looking at what are your own company values? Who are you? Who are you as a company? Who are you as leaders? What do you aspire to be? And what does success look like for you? And so I think you've got to be really clear first about what the values of you have as people, what the values are in the business, and really what is it that you serve to do for your customers? What's the pain point you're solving or what's the need that you're serving? And I know it starts with that business side, but I think every time that we're helping companies with searches now, I spend equal amount of time trying to understand the business, where it's come
Right.
from, where it's going, what are the gaps, where are you going to be 5 years from now? because all of those things is part of the whole big puzzle that you're trying to solve with that extra piece that you're gonna drop in there where when you're gonna hire that VP of sales.
Yeah.
Uh, so I would say it starts with that, and then the obvious things come up, which is what are the technical skills that are gonna match with your printing business that you need or your steel manufacturing business. There's things that are that way, but you'd be surprised, I think, and many people might be, that very often we're hiring people that don't necessarily come from the industries that we put them into,
Right.
but they have that magic in terms of it starts with attitude, which is I'm a big believer on. You can teach anything, but it's tough to teach attitude.
Yeah.
Uh, but it starts with attitude, a gotta wanna headset, which is about you gotta wanna show up, you gotta wanna do it.
Right.
Passion,
Right.
passion for doing it. And then it comes with, are they leadership material? And there's
Right.
lots of ways to determine whether they're leadership material. It's testing, personality profiles. I always recommend doing those. Success Finder, Predictive Index. There's a lot of good tests and different things out there that give you a snapshot.
Yeah.
I would say that people's mistake on people hires are not about there's not enough good people. I don't think there's not enough time putting into finding enough good people. I just people cheat the process too much.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that because I was coaching a leader. We started working together early last year, and he had said to his leadership, this part of the business that we have been paying a vendor for, I want to make it internal to the business within 18 months. This is this big goal, and they had to, basically convert the entire global
Good.
network to this internal system as opposed to this external vendor. And he was like, I don't know if we can do it, but I'm determined to do it. And we talked about strategies for how to make it happen. And I said, you need to hire for a team that is going to accomplish that. Don't
Right.
like the priority needs to be on who's going to fit in the team in a way that makes the team successful because no one individual is going to be so talented to overwhelm a crappy team. It's interesting because you talk about 8 executives at a place like Pattison. When you have really talented people in a
Mhm.
talented environment that
Yeah,
encourages people to access their full potential, it's a completely different experience. My experience with my own company at Aristotle Performance is like, it's a small team. We're a real small company, but
yeah,
we look and operate like we're probably 10 times the size that we
yeah,
are because we're really what we are is obsessed with solving problems.
which is awesome.
And it's
Yeah, and again, our experience was when we were at corporate and we weren't, again, traveling to businesses and in their lunch all the time as to what they're doing. We really aim to be enablers, not disablers. We were looking to go, hey, it's your business. You're the operators. We're not. We want to support you when you need it. We don't want to force support. And we're not looking for trouble, but it's you need to own it. You need to put your arms around it, do it. We never, for that reason, Neil, we never, when people said to us, what are you expecting for the business this year? Said, we're expecting you to tell us.
right,
So we're not expecting anything. We're expecting you to tell us business. It's your business.
right.
Here's the business plan for next year. We pick it up and we show them a white piece of paper. They say there's nothing on here. Yeah, that's right. Because you're going to put on there what it is it you want to do because no one knows this business like the operators.
Yeah,
And then we would stand back and be there to support if need be, or to ask questions if we saw it hitting the guardrails and coloring outside the lines. Then we would come back and try and offer support. But I think it's that attitude of picking the right people and then really letting them lead and getting out of the way. I think is I don't know. I tell you, it's 70% of success.
yeah. It's definitely a big number. I think it's really interesting because, and I'm going to ask you this question too, because I asked my father-in-law, who I mentioned previously, who's been around the block and back. I said, everybody's talking about this time, this moment in time, as though it's like the most chaotic, most complex, the most uncertain there's ever been. And I said, do you agree with that, or is there actually another time that was worse, for example? And I'm curious on your perspective on that. Like at this time, so many people say, "Oh, it's harder to lead than ever. It's harder than this. It's worse than that. It's always the worst." Is it really? And do you think leadership has fundamentally changed?
Yeah, I think that there's no doubt that leadership has changed and evolved and has needed to evolve, just as like we all need to evolve. That's just
Right.
what we do on this earth. We're all evolving. But I don't think it's necessarily harder now. In many respects, I would say it's easier. I don't think it's ever been easier to start a business than it is today.
Yeah.
I don't think it's ever I really don't. I think there was a lot more swings and roundabouts that you had to go through to create a business than ever before. Now, against that, I would say the complexities of talent availability with obviously the demographics, the psychographics around baby boomer generation moving on and the gap between the next generation coming in, et cetera. That's made for a lot more of the challenges around the 80-20 rule, meaning that everyone's looking for the same 20%. And
Right.
that's why you've got to be a lot better at attracting people. And then having the environment and having the development opportunity for those people to thrive and want to stay with you, because I don't think people are as inclined to stay for the 25, 30-year watch that you might get for working for CN Rail or another
Yeah.
organization. That doesn't exist anymore. So there's a lot more movement in the workplace. And I think we're in it or on the precipice, depending on where you are with knowledge, of another whole brand new, I nearly said revolution, maybe it's gonna be, of what AI is
Yeah.
gonna change in every aspect of a business. But I still think that humans, being the smart people they are and all the rest of it, will also adapt to that. They'll find a way to figure out that they don't have to have 5,000 pounds of AI right away. They can
That's right.
a little bit and they can figure out. But I think it's actually going to be another opportunity. Right now, the early parts of it, I think it's going to be challenging for people to navigate, and it's going to be yet another internet like thing that we've all had to deal with in business that we've never faced before, right? But I don't
Yeah.
think is tougher now, in short, than it was before, or vice versa. I really don't. I think it just keeps evolving.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I one of the perspectives I've had for years, I was asked many years ago to write an article about modern leadership. What is that? And I said, people follow the same kind of people that they have for thousands of years.
Mhm.
And it's, we want to feel very similarly around our leaders as we have for eons.
Absolutely.
And I think that there's that side of the question. What do we want to see in leaders and who do we want to follow and how do we want to feel when we're in that sort of followership role? And then what are the problems that leaders are helping us face and navigate? And I think that side changes a lot and the other side has changed very little. And you mentioned AI. I think for me, it's actually just a new sort of canvas and palette to which people are going to get things done. And now we're in a world, I think, where authority is no longer what people are looking for. What they're looking for is authenticity.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, and there's more, and I think in the workplace, anything I would say about the workplace, I think that employees and workers are gonna continue to expect more from workplaces. More in terms of I don't mean more in quantifiable more necessarily. What I mean is maybe workplaces to offer development training is just a rite of passage. It's just something
Right.
that you automatically get. I think people are seeking.
Yes. Table stakes.
Yeah, I think it's just naturally what you do and what you're involved with. Even coaching, even all the things that workplaces didn't ever used to offer, that they're offering more of it. And again, the whole workplace flexibility, as much as it's gonna be a boxing match for a long time about, oh, this company's forcing them in, this one's forcing them out, this one's doing it down the middle. It's the 5 day in the office situation is never going to be back, I don't believe, as the mainstream way of working.
Right.
Flexibility in a workplace and flexibility in terms of how you conduct work and where it's done is changed forever. There's no question about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because what you're saying, what are the new table stakes for operating an organization and what are the expectations? I think one of the things that's most critical about it, and I think where I see three different models, and I'm curious if you see this too or if you expand on it. But one of the things I see a lot is organizations where leaders are chronically undertrained. I see
Yeah.
organizations where leaders are trained extensively and are used to and familiar with learning new things, applying new things, and demonstrating situational vulnerability, I guess you might call it. As a result of that, they're in this constant state of new things and they're very well prepared. Certainly, those organizations are exceptional. And then there's these very rare few where there's very little structured training, but the leaders are voracious learners. There's a culture of mentorship, there's a culture of development and growth, there's a culture of just expansion of potential.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, like, how do you try to get people to invest in that sort of table stakes? How do you get them to try to go about doing it? Because there's different models.
Well, interesting you touched on this because I can say that there isn't one thing I've recommended more to teams that I'm coaching and involved with in services that we provide through People Inc. more than ensuring that you have a consistent training and development headset
Right.
and that isn't a disappearing line item depending on how well we did with sales. The old days
Right.
of, "Oh, we'd like to take this sales course, boss. Well, let's see how we're doing next month.
Yeah.
And if we have a next month, and if it's not next month, well, next year, but for sure we're going to take that sales contest." And making training development an actual line item on
Yeah.
every company's budget. And I've been really pushing people to say, "Hey, aside from all the things that you're doing in your products and services, and whatnot, what the difference maker is going to be that you've got the best trained people that
Yeah.
are motivated, consistent, and are jazzed about being there and jazzed about representing you." And I think the only way you do that is that you commit to ongoing training. It's built into their annual game plans as much as delivering on success metrics are.
Yeah.
Like
No,
you're like, "Hey, Neil, what are we gonna do for you this year?" "Yep, here's your goals and all these things, but what parts of your skill set do you wanna develop? And maybe even what part of your soft skills do you think that you could develop more to be better?" And I think the more that people see those companies investing in them in that way, and not just through standard paychecks and all the other benefits, I think in many respects, that's gonna mean as much as their paycheck will be in terms of that, that the company cares about me, that the company's interested in my well-being and not just determining, is Neil a keeper? And if he is, maybe we'll put him in this program versus if he's
yeah.
not, we won't sign him up. I think we're still a long way away from that. I think people
Yeah.
are still in that mode of, let's see how our budgets look and we can design whether we're going to do it. I'm actually encouraging people to go out there and hire a training and develop leader that
Yeah.
actually basically does a build to suit on a program for their individual company.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think those are it's such an important investment. I know there's a thought leader named Alex Hormozy that talks about entrepreneurship and familiar with his name.
Sure.
And I was listening to him the other day and he said his comment was you can't buy time,
Right.
but the closest thing to buying time is buying competency. And I thought
Sure.
that was so brilliant because if you want to reach a goal faster, the best way to do it is to get better at accomplishing that goal faster.
100%.
And then you get to that point, and it's such an interesting back to that sort of entrepreneurial spirit. When you become obsessed with solving problems, what you actually become obsessed with is learning how to get better at solving those problems.
Yeah.
And you just don't care what the problem is. You're like, this is the thing
Yeah.
between me and that goal. I'm gonna do what it takes. And then the price comes in, and the question, I guess, is really can individuals do that math? And then at an organizational level, can people do that math?
I'm hoping that both do it. I think I continue to see more people and have conversations with friends and colleagues about their own investment, not just talking, we sit around talking about what's your investments in the market and everywhere else, but
Right.
what's your investment in yourself?
Yeah.
what are you going to do? What's your professional development budget look like for the year, whether it be sponsored by the company or sponsored by you? But I think that is starting to creep into our psyche a little bit more, which is great to see, is that people going, no, I'm committed to spending X amount, improving myself in these different areas, taking courses. Continuous learning needs to be a common theme amongst people too. It can't be just the
Yeah.
responsibility of the company. I think there needs to be some responsibility of the individual to try and lean into that as well.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I found on my leadership journey. I had a leadership position when I was 13, Army cadets.
What was your job?
And my first leadership position was as a section commander in Army cadets. It's you look at it from the outside and you're like, that's kid stuff. And at the same time, you're being asked to do adult stuff when you are a kid and take responsibility for others and invest in your own learning and teach others and make decisions and figure out how to make decisions with a group. That was a big one, was how to
Huge.
navigate group decision making when you're like, you're a kid, you're 13,
Great
that's dumb.
experience.
And one of the things that I find interesting is that my whole leadership journey actually brought me back to how I wanted to lead then. It was actually a journey of refinding what that kid wanted to do and unlearning a lot of the crappy behaviors that I learned from a variety of, we'll say, eclectic
Yeah. Yeah.
spirited.
I like it. I like it. So you did design the leadership program for that kid as an exercise?
I haven't, but that would be an interesting
Be a fun thing to do.
practice. It's funny that now you say that our sort of courageous leader program that we deliver all over the world, that would be something I'd put that kid through.
It's great. I love it.
And something that like, it's because it's focused on character trait. I think what we're talking about is what are the characteristics that enable people to go through a world that's going to change and then bring other people with them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Do you believe in natural born leaders?
I think there's two kinds of leaders. I think there's natural born leaders, and I think there's people who become leaders. And I think both are capable.
Yeah.
I think what's the phrase, by hook or by crook?
Yeah.
Some people get there and they're good, but they never wanted it.
Right.
And
Right.
and I think there's some people that just gravitate towards it. And I think that's something, and part of the reason why I say that is because in my career, I have in every job I've ever had moved rapidly to some kind of leadership position.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as a result, held some kind of leadership position for 26 years.
And I agree with you. And you mentioning that course that you offer, I think that's a great course to offer and something that people should line up for a lot more because I think that leadership is well, an ever changing environment like we talked about. There's a lot more things that leaders are responsible for. And you know what? It ain't easy being a leader. It's tough.
Oh,
It's lonely at the top and it's lonely in leadership because you are under the gun yourself to be all things to all people sometimes, or certainly make yourself feel that way. But I think in terms of what you just said, I think there's people with natural born instincts that are definitely natural leadership instincts, but need training. And I think though that great leaders can be trained, but if they have the instincts as well, which is it's a benefit. But I think that there's both like you. So I tend to agree with you on that.
yeah, I think it's just a shorter trip to a similar outcome. But back to that entrepreneurial drive, that sort of attitude side of things is that if you have a goal, once you realize, oh, leadership competency is the thing that's in my way, that's the new problem that I have to solve.
Right.
I think that's when a lot of people become leaders. And I know a friend of mine works with a lot of small business in BC, and a lot of the people that do that, they've reached the full capacity of their business and they can't expand their business until they become leaders.
Mhm.
And I think I'm curious about your view of the difference between managers and leaders. Do you differentiate between those two
Well,
or
you could have
not? And then
yeah, you can have managers that are leaders, no question. They can be leading an area, so to speak. I don't know if that makes them great leaders,
Right.
or it just makes them great task owners of an area. But I don't necessarily see them as leaders. I see them as an opportunity to be leaders. But I think it's much more than that because it's the combination of process, people, environment. You're having to become a master at blending those things and not in a heavy-handed way. I think that gone are the days that we're task masters and
Right.
people banging the desks and all that nonsense, the old sitcoms and the old TV shows. Leadership is much more forward thinking. It's much more,
Yeah.
human centric. It's much more focused on diversity and inclusion. And it's empathetic leadership, right? And I think that's a very different form. And that's why I'm saying that leadership evolves. And I think we have to evolve as leaders as a result of it. Because 10 years ago, how was leadership? And I'd say even between now and 10 years ago, it was very different.
Yeah. It's funny because my first sort of real leadership position, I remember my boss saying to me, and it was as a tree climber, because I used to climb trees for a living and long before I became a consultant. And he said, the best leaders know how to lead from the ground. You don't have to be this guy. And I didn't have a clue what he was talking. He said that to me, and I'm like, he could have been speaking Spanish.
You say, don't climb the rope,
I'm just like, come on, man, you're killing me. And I think the worst part was knowing that I wasn't doing it, that I was doing a horrible job. And I think that was one of the things that I brought with me into my work in leadership development and working with leaders in this kind of this space around leadership is the realization or the reality for me was that at that time I was just trying to manage,
right,
couldn't lead really
right.
yet. I was just trying to manage myself, let alone manage other people. And it's go lead, man.
That's another level.
Yeah, this is gonna go bad. And it did, and it took a couple of years, and I came around. It ended up being okay, but it was a really rough road. I remember losing sleep over not being able to lead to the level that I expected of myself or others clearly. And I always thought that was a bit of an unfair mantle to put
Yeah.
on someone is
Yeah.
go lead. And so I'm just trying to survive.
There's lots of examples of that today because I think that more than ever, there is a huge number of people that are pushed along through companies based on good work, efforts,
Right.
results, pushed into management, pushed into leadership positions or potential leadership positions that are not necessarily trained for it and haven't had that experience, not through anything that they've done because they've been just focusing on making the main thing their role. And I think that there's a huge opportunity for people in those roles to make sure they get into something that is gonna give them support while they're making those journeys, because I think there's too many of those types of folks that have got a great opportunity, but they're so busy with it that they have a hard time getting mentored within that role to become that better leader and to learn some of the leadership things that they should be knowing.
Yeah. Yeah. I love
Yeah.
it. So I got to ask you two questions in
Sure.
particular that I've been sitting on for a while. I'm curious, what is one piece of advice that you want every leader that you talk to really like embody and internalize?
One piece of advice to have everybody embody, internalize. I think what comes to mind right now for me is being authentic. I think we talked about AI before and all the things, all the opportunities is going to be to make us inauthentic or unreal or something that is an apparition or something. But I think that leaders need to be real. Leaders need to be authentic. They need to show up as who they are, not with their packaging on at work and then different other. They need to show up and be who they are. Because I think that leaders will gain immediate trust with folks when they go, hey, this guy's a real guy. Neil's a real guy. This is what you got. Whether they've got some issues or foibles or things that they need to improve, I don't even think people care about that. They're open to everybody having something they need to work on. But when people come across as something they're not, or which often is a masking of insecurities.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's awkward. I think it's awkward, and I think it doesn't breed this comfort zone, which I think it should. I'd say honor authenticity and really be a champion of that because I think it's such an important thing.
I love that. I love that because I believe we're exiting the age of authority and entering this the age of authenticity. It's such a
At
big.
100%.
Another question I have for you is, what's one piece of advice that you got early in your career that you would go back and tell yourself to ignore?
One piece of advice, okay, to go back and ignore. Go back and ignore. Wow. Wow. Probably when my dad said I couldn't join the Rolling Stones tour in Europe, uh, 18-year-old summer job. Well, he actually didn't say that. He actually said when I told him that I got offered a summer job working true story, working for I could take on a job in the Rolling Stones tour of Europe,
Yeah.
when I was 19, and I said, "What do you think?" He says, "If you can get on the off the driveway without me shooting you, then you can take that. You can." Well, yeah, I'm teasing. I love music and I think I would have loved it. He was probably absolutely right. But yeah, just in a fun way, I think I would have ignored that. But I think from a serious note, one thing, piece of advice I ignored, try all the swim lanes. It's a bit of a contradiction because I'm often now always saying to people, stay in your lane, stay in your swim lane, figure out what you're passionate about, get clarity. I could say that 10 times, get clarity and then go for the gold medal in that lane. Don't keep
Right.
switching lanes every time. Now, someone could say, what about if I'm early in my career and I'm wanting to explore and do those things? And I'd say, yeah, you know what? Do try and do take a peek at that. But at some point, you got to find the lane that you love and you're passionate about, and
Yeah.
then be the best version of yourself in that lane.
I love that. And I think because you mentioned something when we were chatting earlier about the 80/20.
Yeah.
I think it was one of your first questions to me. Maybe you can remember it.
It was the 80/20. Well, I think it was seeking out great people. And I said, we're all aiming for the same 20, right? Which was the Pareto principle, the 80/20 rule.
Yeah. Yeah. I think your question of me was, are you doing, is 80% of your time doing what you love? And I thought that was such a great question. And I think the only real way to figure that out is whatever, mess around and find out. You know?
Yeah, and I used to say, if you can get up and feel 2 inches taller than you actually are every morning and just jazz to get to go do whatever it is that you do, you're on the right track. Listen to your belly. Close your eyes in a still moment. Listen to your belly and going, "Is this jazzing me?" Because like you mentioned, Neil, and you're like, you're spot on. Time is a thing that slips through our fingers every single day, and we can never get it back. We can lend out lots of things. We can't lend out time.
Yeah.
And I always used to joke with some of my staff and say, "You know what day it is?" And they say, "No, what day is it?" I said, "It's January 7th, 2025." "Oh my gosh, is that something I gotta remember?" I go, "Well, only the fact that this is the last January 7th, 2025 you're ever gonna have.
Yeah.
So
Right.
make it count for something.
Yeah.
Make it count for something." And just it supports the idea that, it's a blessing. Life's a blessing.
Yeah.
We are absolutely blessed to live in a free country. Sure, we got our issues and opportunities, but we're blessed to live in freedom, to live in good health, fairly prosperous, not scraping the dirt for food, not in a war zone. Man, take that and now go be the best version of yourself. You owe it to yourself to do it, right?
I love that. I love that. It ties in really well to what you said earlier too, which never been a better time or an easier time to start a business.
I don't think so.
And it's funny too, because I grew up in a generation of like people being told to follow your passion,
Right.
which I'm totally against. Full on. Nobody needs to hear your horrible guitar playing.
No, you can enjoy your passion. You don't
Yeah.
necessarily have to follow it for work.
Yeah. Go love it all you want. Don't
Exactly.
necessarily make it your work.
It's like,
But I think there's this opportunity. There is an opportunity to have your work and the things that you take responsibility for and find meaning in to make you feel 2 inches taller. You know,
100%. And
it's
why not just go out there and do it? Why wouldn't you? You know what? I have a little journal that I write in, And for longest time, I've had this journal, and when I get a new one, it's a little cheap moleskin $3 journal that I buy and write in whenever I feel like up to it. On my front page, I write on it just 3 words, and it says, "Why not me?" Question mark.
Right.
There's so many possibilities. Why not me?
I love that.
You
That's
know?
awesome.
It's such a great three-word thing, right? It just the abundance out there of things that we can do and that we can make a difference at.
Yeah.
We can leave a mark on, even if it's only for ourselves, is tremendous, right?
Yeah, I love that. There's a saying in the mountain bike world, because I'm been an avid mountain biker since it was
Yeah.
like emerging sport in North Vancouver in the 90s. And the saying is, don't look at the rock, look at the gap. And you can spend a lifetime looking at all the reasons why not
Right.
me, why this, why that. And it's like, why not me? That's the gap. And I think that's where leadership is born, but it's also where that feeling of being 2 inches taller in the morning is born.
Totally. Totally.
I love that.
No, agree. We're on the right page.
Yeah, we're doing it. Awesome. I think that feels like a nice natural place to end the conversation for today. And Rob, I really appreciate you coming on podcast and
Yeah, thank you
whatnot.
for having me, and it's great to chat and great to share the afternoons batting back and forth. So, thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Look
Okay.
forward to the next time we get to chat.
All right, good deal. Cheers, deal.
Cheers.
Bye for now.